We'll just go around and do introductions of folks. I'm Ailey Lowry, and I'm on the board, and I'm the chair of this committee.
Hi, I'm Gary Holland. I'm on the board, and I'm a committee member.
Rachel Lent, paralegal.
I was waiting for the next thing.
Go.
Julia Brim Edwards, board member and committee member.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Garcia, Chief of Staff.
Angelica Cruz, Director of Early Learners. Emily Glasgow, Senior Director of Pre-K 5 Academics.
Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel.
Liz March, Contractor General Counsel.
And we have Kara Bradshaw, who's our secretary today. Terry, you already introduced yourself, didn't you?
No, I didn't. Terry Proctor, Communications Department.
And then Robin.
Robin Ferrone, Strategic Partnerships.
Thanks, Robin. As we get started, I just wanted to share in this public forum the information I sent to the policy committee and the full board on October 7th as part of our policy work plan. Part of our work as a board this year is we're working with AJ Craybill and folks from the Council of Great City Schools to really refine our understanding of governance and to focus on our board goals, because when boards behave in those ways, we can see a direct correlation to improve student outcomes, which I think everybody around this table wants better outcomes for our students. So as part of that work, especially around our foundation policy, talked about that. We're going to go ahead and work with the entire board on the foundation policy. We're going to have 2 work sessions on foundations, one on November 14th and one on December 6th. All the information for that work session on the 14th has been sent out. Is that correct, Jonathan?
It's been sent out to the board, and it will be public closer to the November 14th.
Yes, and so for the board right now, the opportunity is to ask questions about all of that information that has been shared ahead of the work session on the 14th, and then we have time between the 14th and the 6th to sort of ruminate on what we've heard, to continue to ask questions, and then at the December 6th work session, we'll be working together to sort of set a direction, and then the policy committee will come back and work with the direction of the full board on the foundation policy. The timeline was sent out to everybody in the email and is also available in the supplemental minutes for this.
That's a question. At the last committee meeting in June, it's bad Michelle's not here, but she had asked for there to be more community engagement with Black families. Is that happening?
Jonathan?
I mean, that was the reason why we didn't move forward with the policy in June, because Michelle had asked for more engagement with Black families, in addition to the engagement we had with the other.
Yeah, I would say if that is the direction of the entire board for us to do engagement, then we will do that.
So that's something that could be brought up at that work session, and that
Absolutely.
might be. Yeah. And I don't think that's the only reason that policy didn't move forward in June, but that's.
Well, I'm just saying that that was a very specific request
From one board member.
that the public,
So
I think you agreed as well. I mean, I think there was a consensus on the committee, so I'm just.
So that's kind of where we are heading with the foundation policy, and again, November 14th will be the work session on that. All right, we're excited to have Emily here with us today to help us understand some changes that are coming.
We'll see that we're proposing.
Yeah, we're talking about,
Thank you for having us. And I have with us Angelica Cruz, who's our new Director of Early Learners, sort of passing the torch and working together on this. So this is actually a proposal that's been several years in the making. It got somewhat waylaid by COVID, as did lots of things, but we're wanting to resurface it in time for next year if possible. This is in reference to board policy 4.10.0.020, which talks about our compulsory enrollment and age entrance requirements. We have had a long-standing tradition of having an early entry to kindergarten process in PPS. It was formerly administered by the TAG office, but about a year and a half ago was moved over to the Early Learners Department, which was really only created about 4 years ago, but is a much more logical place for anything related to kindergarten to sit. And what we've had a chance to do over the last several years is really apply our PPS equity lens as well as our early learner core values to the policy, which is something we're sort of trying to do with all of our policies at this point. And what we've come to find is that there are a lot of pretty significant equity concerns about this policy. The early entry to K practice, basically, so the general guideline is that students have to be 5 by September 1st to enter kindergarten. What the early entry to kindergarten process does is allow a bit of a loophole in there for students who were born between September 2nd and October 31st. So if they miss that cutoff by a month, they can apply to the early entry to kindergarten process, which again is now administered by the Early Learners Department. And then what families have to do, if they know about that process and they decide to apply, they have to then go get privately assessed using a cognitive test. And we've kind of outlined that in the memo. There are some sliding scales for that, but it costs, even with the sliding scale, anywhere between $400 and $1,100 to get that assessment completed. We've also now heard lots of feedback from families, particularly families whose native language is not English, that there's a lot of concern about the cultural and linguistic relevance and accuracy of the assessments. Remember, we're assessing 4-year-olds in this case, and so we've gotten a lot of feedback from families of bilingual children who say that their children, they believe, have these capacities, but that this particular test is not a way of assessing those capacities. So, so we're concerned about the burden this puts on families. We're concerned about who gets this information. We're concerned about having an entrance exam for 4-year-olds from an equity standpoint. And then we've tracked some of the historical data, which is in the memo, just to look by racial demographic at who has applied and who has been accepted. And it's very disparate. And so, and I should say also, we're talking about anywhere between 15 and 30 families that this impacts per year. So it's a small number of families that know about this process and apply and qualify. And then when we look at the racial demographics, what we see, for example, is between 2009 and 2014, 43% of the applicants were white and 65% of those applications were approved. And in that same time span, 7.6% of the applicants were Black and only 30% of their applications were approved. And so there's just real concerns around, from an equity perspective again, around who is accessing this kind of loophole to our rule. And then if somebody knows about it and accesses it, like, what are the metrics we're using to decide whether or not that they would apply, and are those racially or linguistically biased? And what we've come to decide based on our evaluation is that this is not an equitable policy and it doesn't align with our PPS equity statement or our early learners core values. So our recommendation would be to abandon the policy in practice and just set the rule that students need to be 5 by September 1st to apply for kindergarten. We're also excited to say that we have a lot more pre-K opportunity available to families now, and more coming. So it also feels like the right time to reevaluate this and say, well, there is an option for 4-year-olds. It's not like 4-year-olds just have to, wait a year if they're close to that cutoff. So I think I'll stop there and see what questions folks have.
So what we're going to do is because this is sort of a new policy that's come before us and is somewhat of a change to a program, that we're going to discuss and ask questions today, and that for us to make a decision, we'd bring this back in December. And because I saw in the memo it said to begin January 1, so we would actually have to push that timeline back, because we would, if we don't recommend it to the board till December, then the board can't vote on it. We have to do the whole board steps, and so that would push it out to like February, March.
Okay.
What does that do to your program then?
I would say, so we start all of our sort of kindergarten outreach and Connect to Kindergarten communications really in January, February. They heat up after spring break, but for families that are pursuing this option, they often start asking questions earlier. We're already getting some questions. We'll definitely start getting more in January, especially because of the assessment component. They have to line that up. That can take months. So we have to look at the timeline and see if it's realistic. If we are going to make the policy change, if it would be realistic for fall 2023, or if we need to hold that another year. It will kind of depend where it falls in that arc in spring.
Board members have any questions about this policy?
So I have a tangential question. So I'm supportive of the policy change. And I'm wondering, just given the rationale that was used for this, last night as I was looking through the tag identification materials, and then I got a communication from a community member after the meeting about the sort of, well, I noted on the data that there's our tag identified students, representative of our student population. And I got a communication later from somebody in the community talking about the sort of the bias in the tag identification test. So this is just a general question of the consistency. So I say I'm supportive of this change, but I'm wondering if we then have, and maybe this isn't your space, but if we then, you know, again, in like first grade, or I can't remember which grade it is, first or second grade, are like once again testing kids with a biased, what could be or is a biased test, that we're getting sort of disproportionate outcomes, and for the same reason why staff is proposing the discontinuation of this practice, that would it be consistent to be also looking at that? And I don't know, there may be state requirements on tag that we need, but I'm also thinking about being, just our consistency.
I think that's a really interesting question. Tag is not in my buckets. And I see the connection you're making. And I think the only thing I would say to separate is I think for a long time there was a misnomer that early entry to K meant tag identification. And it didn't. I think it just was housed in tag because there was no early entry space when this policy came to be. And so even how the tests were used, like what the cutoff scores and all those things were different. And so from an early learning perspective, the reason this might be different is we've also as a district been trying to shift the narrative that kids need to be ready for kindergarten, that there's something called kindergarten readiness, and have really been trying to shift to like, no, it's our obligation as a school system to be ready for the kids coming into kindergarten. Kids come in all different places, and even students who may be very young but pass a cognitive test may have other struggles in kindergarten. And honestly, what principals will say about this policy is that has often been the case, that very young kindergartners coming in who may pass some academic benchmarks may still really struggle in kindergarten sometimes, right? So
Social, emotional.
sure, there's all kinds of things that go into kindergarten. So so it's different from tag, and I think a really inappropriate space to use this kind of testing with the early entry piece. And that's another whole interesting conversation to have at another time, I think. And I'm sure that Dana Narenberg, who oversees TAG, would be interested in talking more.
Thank you.
Dr. Lons, did you have
No, actually, I agree with this vision because I think it will force folks to use their pre-K options. And I think it's very important for the development of kids, without pressure of having to get to the next grade. So I think this is a good thing. Just want to make sure that we're getting the word out about the pre-K piece. I believe we still have room for that. So just making sure that we really get that word out about that option for families.
Yeah.
And we'll, I'd like to give people that space of not making a decision on the same day that something's introduced, so that we have time to think it over.
Sure.
And public can contact us. And we can, so just create that space of information. And obviously, if it's a technical revision, that kind of thing is different than a substantive policy change. So,
Okay.
thank you
Let
very
us know
much.
what you need from us next.
Yeah, we'll see you we're not having our November meeting as the work session for the foundation policy, so we will see you in November.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time.
All right, our next piece comes from a conversation that Liz and I had sort of post our board retreat. Oh, and I meant to say, Michelle's not with us today because she has a new job she's very excited about. but it means that she's no longer available on Wednesdays for policy committee meetings. So I sent out an email to the policy committee. We are going to work on rescheduling all of our meetings December on, because our November one happened to be on a Monday, so that's good. So Kara will be contacting policy committee members to see what works in our schedules so that we can accommodate Michelle, because I think as a member of this committee, her voice is vitally important. So we're going to switch things around. So it's always fun. We're all busy with lives and jobs and things, and so sometimes things change. We have to be agile. But Michelle sends her regrets that she wasn't able to join us today because of her new job. Okay, so then anyway, this next line item came out of a conversation Liz and I had after our board retreat, really thinking about that intersection of policy with our board goals, and how do we really think about the policy role when it comes to those things we have to do that are compliance, the pieces that are governance, and then the pieces that really affect student outcomes. And it was really fascinating. I was at the Council of Great City Schools, and I can't remember what school district it was, but they have like a 4-page policy manual, because the board policies they whittled down to really what is the board's role. And then they have administrative directives for everything else. So they really went on a policy diet and really looked at what is operational that isn't the purview of the board and what really is. So we have a long way to go to get to a 4-page policy manual. I don't know.
I'm not betting on that.
No, I'm not betting on that either. But it was just fascinating to hear this. I went to a whole seminar on policies and boards and governance, and it was really interesting. So Liz is going to talk about some of what came out of our conversation about the kinds of policies we sort of tend to deal with here, and ways we can think about that.
Yeah, and I think you covered probably 80% of it. So, but it was, again, I think the goal was how do we prioritize the work that affects student outcomes coming out of the board retreat on September 17th, and thinking about shaping agendas with that as the primary goal, but also recognizing there's work the policy committee does that is outside of that arena. There are times when the legislature makes a change that requires a change in our policy to be compliant, and even if that doesn't have a direct tie to student outcomes, we need to do it anyway. We are on, a continued long-term review of that very lengthy policy manual to have some cleanup and updates. Again, we will, I think, thinking about student outcomes helps us prioritize that work, but we will also continue to bring forward recommended rescissions or revisions when we think policies need to be updated in one of those two ways. And then there's other, and we also recognize that there'll be other proposals that come from committee members of the community, even staff that are probably not in any of those categories, but still important and funds. This committee will consider those. So as that conversation you and I had just evolved into those categories, we thought that might be helpful. But also we haven't really we tried to categorize this agenda, what would fall in what bucket, how did that feel? But I think certainly we should, it's a work in progress.
And I think policy work, one of the things that we talked about at the council conference was that, policy work sometimes is a way that operational things leak into board things. And so how do we really be clear on the work we're asking staff to do, the time it takes, where we're putting our focus as board members, and what really is a governance piece that furthers student outcomes, and what is more of us getting into operational weeds. And just as a board policy committee, being thoughtful about the kinds of things we're bringing forward and where they fit within the sort of ecosystem of the organization. And we'll continue to have those conversations about where we as a committee want to invest our time and how we think it connects to our board goals and to student outcomes. Anything from my colleagues?
I think that's great.
Yeah, so I guess one thing I'm thinking impacts student outcomes, I would put on an equal footing is equity as a big category. And so yes, student outcomes, but we have a lot of policies, especially policies that are in, were written 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And I think we need to continue to evolve them. So that would be the other thing. And I also think over the last 5 years, there's been an elevation of, I mean, for example, I would take this, what was presented here as more of an equity issue than a student outcome issue. So I guess I would like have just like a little bit broader category. Also, I think there's a lot of wisdom in our community and our current, and it's one of the 4 or 5, clear responsibilities of the board is like just the mechanism that, people can bring things to the, just like the legislature, there's 3,000 bills passed. Don't worry, there's not going to be 3,000. But there's 3,000 bills introduced, and at the end of the day, maybe 1,000 aren't going to get committee hearings because the decision is like, no, we're going to put that off, or that's not the wheelhouse, or we don't want to do it. Then some others have committee work, and it's actually, well, we don't need to pass a bill to do this. We could, it's really somebody else's agency, and so, I think one of the values of the policy committee, I do think it allows for issues to get surfaced before they explode. And it doesn't mean it's the result of the conversation is going to be a final enact policy or even how it's introduced, but that it allows the community to surface issues and to bring them, or board members to bring them into a forum for discussion.
And like you said, with the legislature, just because someone brings something forward doesn't mean that we have as a policy committee are going to act on it, but people can bring those things.
I say the vast majority of bills that get introduced don't become law.
I agree wholeheartedly, and that there isn't a monopoly on identifying, significant improvements to what we do or how we operate. We would not want any of that categorization, at least first cut of categorization, to shut that down.
I mean, like just the refinement of, I think we have a pretty good complaint policy, and it can be like improved and doesn't really fall into I wouldn't say it's cleanup. It's not compliance, not student achievement, but like it'd be better for our families and be a more efficient use of staff time. So.
And that may be something that, if that's something we've talked about, that may be something that the committee, we as a committee then get to decide, is that how we're going to prioritize our work this year, or are there other things? So we'll continue to have those conversations. And I don't think this is cut and dried that if it doesn't fit into one of these buckets, we don't do it. But I think it's saying this is some of how we're thinking about the work we do.
I think cleanup, as we're talking about it, is an inartful label. And again, we'll refine those, because I would put cleanup in broader than just cleanup, but in some of those revisions that are
Essential.
And not, it's probably not wholesale rewrite, but it is improvement.
Yeah. Like the policy, we updated the complaint policy and we're living into it, and we'll learn things as we live into it, and then we need to make adjustments. So.
I mean, I would, instead of other, which I think is like a little bit, so cleanup, I think there's probably a better word for it. Other, it seems like there's like an emerging issue or like community surfaced issues or like board surface issues that like just other seems like I don't know, like a too generic.
Did you have anything else, Gary? Jonathan, I think you have some thoughts about religious holidays.
Yeah, it's just,
I guess
now, I don't
this
know if thoughts is.
We're putting this into compliance, trying to put it into that bucket of sort of.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon.
And perfect with although it's not a religious holiday, there should be like cultural events and religious holidays. I think we had public testimony last night about Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think from our MLC students was impactful. So they were adorable.
I'm curious, how is this compliance? Or are we out of compliance with some law or something?
I think it's roughly compliance as we think about First Amendment, free exercise, and Establishment Clause issues both. Okay. Again, this is a thinking construct, first draft, not a.
But it helps us just think about the buckets our work falls in and the kinds of places we're spending our time.
There's some students who would say it affects student outcomes.
Yeah.
In fairness.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. All right, well, so I'm here to provide the board committee an update on our work to strengthen communication and across the district so that we are all providing the supports to families and students who observe some major religious and cultural holidays. Roseanne is posting the materials on the website.
Do we have them?
There's a slide deck.
So a few things. Here's one document.
Oh, do you have it, Gary?
No, this is I'm for passing.
There's more than one.
Yes.
But there's no slide deck? Sorry.
So there one.
Do we have this deck? It wasn't in the materials.
So Rosanna's trying to post it right now, but
It's online, I just can't get the.
is it on board books? It's in
It-
board books.
It wasn't.
It came on today. I'm just trying to.
Oh, I don't see it in board books, Roseanne. Oh, there it is. Okay, awesome.
If you want to give me,
Just one second.
Roseanne, can you email it if you don't mind?
so as this is getting up, I just want to provide just a quick update on work today and some next steps connected to this. So one, I wanted to share that we are finalizing an update to the PPS calendar, which is what just was shared with you here. As you all know, there is a request that we include religious holidays and cultural observances into the district's calendar, which we've done here as a draft. And as you'll know, we've drafted that, put that in there. That although school is in session, that we will be very explicit about avoiding conflicts there. So that's update number one. Update number two is that our staff has been really clear and working at the school level, in other words, with our principals, and have been communicating and providing really robust information about avoiding conflicts. In fact, we created an internal Google calendar that just automatically puts these events, these major holidays on folks' calendars, blocks it off, if you will. And we also included a monthly principals checklist. And I want to be very explicit here. I think and this is part of our continuous improvement efforts. I will say that our focus has been with school level staff, in other words, with our principals, communicating that with them. And what we're learning is that that this requires a three-pronged approach to communicating, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And a lot of that comes from our conversation that we had a few weeks ago with the Jewish Federation of the Greater Portland. They reached out to us in the spirit of partnership, in the spirit of PPS can do better, and so they shared feedback in terms of what they have been hearing from our community. Some of the things that we heard from them, as you can see on your slide, is making sure that we provide clear and targeted communication. And I want to be clear of what that means. They noted, for example, in one of our, they noted that some major holidays in the Jewish calendar or the Muslim calendar start the day, the sunset prior.
Right.
But the holiday, in fact, is the day, the day of. So like January 6th, sundown starts on January 4th. January 5th and 6th, thank you. When we communicate holidays, we typically communicate January 6th, not January 5th. And so one of the shifts that we want to start making is making sure that folks know, and we do it. We acknowledge that the holiday starts on sundown, but we're not as explicit as saying, families, in fact, might have different activities in the morning, even though the sundown, the holiday starts on sundown. Does that make sense?
Well, and if you're saying the 6th, and it's like, oh, we can still have our PTA meeting
On the 5th.
but that's actually
But that's not
after
true.
sundown.
Correct.
Right. So you can't actually have the literacy event on the 5th.
Correct.
Yeah, one of the things that I would be interested in is hearing, just there's a spectrum because at sundown is not like some, I believe if you're Orthodox Jewish, you would prepare all your food and have that all done beforehand. So it would be like saying, hey, Christmas starts at the Christmas dinner and you can schedule up until a Christmas dinner time, which is like a sundown or whatever. So I think especially for like the 2 major days, which are usually on school days, that we should be like, think about the language we use, because otherwise I do think people will be like, oh, sundown, I can go right up until sundown.
Absolutely.
And like, never mind, some people might not drive once the holiday starts, and
That's
like they don't
absolutely
have a way to get home.
That's right. The second thing that came out of, or a second highlight, I would say, is this desire for targeted communication and targeted engagement. And what I mean by that is, what we know is that a large section of, for example, of our Jewish community lives in the Southwest. They attend Southwest schools. Just like a large population of our Vietnamese community, attends schools on the east side of Portland. And so how do we create cluster PD, if you will, or cluster specific resources so that school principals can really work with their communities to address the specific holidays in those communities.
And I was gonna say, like for me, volunteering at Grout, when Ramadan started last year, the EAs were like, oh, hey, remember it's Ramadan, so if you see a kid not eating, don't worry about it, right? Don't bother them about it, basically. Because normally if a kid's not eating, we'll say, oh, hey, how you doing, buddy? What's going on today? But it was that, again, cultural sensitivity. So they had all been trained and were all prepared. And then they were reminding me, who's, not receiving PD, to be culturally sensitive. And they do the same thing with anyone who's subbing, right? So that's the kind of thing where we don't want to put a kid in a weird space. So we need to train adults.
Absolutely. Again, as I mentioned, we've been doing groundwork with the school level or principals, and to that end, some important things to know is that this year, no back to school nights conflicted with any of the Jewish holidays, which is important. But we know we can do more. There have been other areas, right?
We know that outdoor school is
The
going to be an
outdoor
issue
school.
as I look at all of April.
Right, outdoor school.
Yeah.
And so we are working, as you can know, in some of our next steps. We continue to work with MESD to address that and make sure that we're mitigating the impact, especially as we get into the spring. So again, in terms of some next steps, and I'll rush here. One of the things that was really important for me and the team in meeting with the Jewish Federation, that it offered us opportunities to think about what does it look like to engage with the Interfaith Council, to seek guidance from other faith-based organizations, gatherers, if you will, to inform our process, and other community-based organizations like APANO, like the Muslim Educational Trust. So we'll be reaching out to those folks and seeking guidance so that this can be strengthened and again, in the spirit of continuous improvement. We're actively working right now with our PIL athletics team to make sure that the scheduling for athletics, it doesn't conflict for the next school year. And as you mentioned, continue to work with outdoor school or with MESD on outdoor school. Go ahead.
So, with MSD piece, we was previously on the board of MSD, and so the outdoor school stuff, from my remembrance, because they don't own those sites, that's where they're going to have the biggest hurdle.
Yeah.
Because they don't own the sites. So just as a note of caution, talking with them about that. And so there's other, they're the biggest one that uses them, but that's just one of their issues.
Absolutely. So if we go to I'll go to the next, before we go to the next slide, I'll just note one of the things that we learned from the Jewish Federation leadership is that there is a legislative bill that is being possibly championed at the state level around religious and cultural holidays. And so it essentially will encourage school districts to develop a plan for how we support families who need to honor religious holidays. So.
But we don't know yet who's we haven't seen that, we tried to find the language.
Correct. There isn't a bill. But what we know is that there are conversations that OSBA and other folks are having with legislators on that. So we'll monitor, and obviously, as we're working through the legislative priorities, we'll add that to the list. So
Yeah, I mean, and one thing I would say about that is, if we're going to support it, we should make sure that we have a strong and robust plan before we, I mean, just so that we're not saying, hey, we should have this, but we're not doing it ourselves.
absolutely.
My hope would be that we are meeting and frankly exceeding whatever would come down in that bill, but we're a little bit in the blind because we don't know what it is yet, but we're proceeding on the work.
Well,
Absolutely.
and I think the conversation for the future is, do we take like Eid off, right? Like where, are there any holidays that we're currently not days off school that we think might need to be added? And that's the next piece of this conversation. And I know that involves negotiation with labor partners, but that's what we heard from our students. Instructional hours. I mean, it might mean extending the school year, all sorts of things, but that's some of the feedback we heard from our students last year was, this is the first step. Is there more?
So next slide, just really quick on the next two slides. So here is, I just want to give you a kind of a sense of how we're thinking about it and how we're beginning to shift communication. We will begin to shift communication in major religious holidays, religious and cultural holidays here. So as we mentioned, we've been really focused on the school level communication, in other words, to our principals about avoiding scheduling important events that by their nature cannot be made up, such as picture day, open house, back to school, outdoor school, etc. I think the next level of work that is underway is communication to classroom level, to our educators and school-based staff, so that they can avoid, and make reasonable accommodations when scheduling quizzes, tests, final exam reviews, field trips, or other major classroom-based activities. So again, we've been focused on the principal, making sure that our classroom educators have that information. And similarly, now more foundational is all PPS communication, making sure district-wide we have our central office departments and PTAs, et cetera, aware of these holidays. So using a three-pronged approach, I think will strengthen our and avoid some of these challenges that we've had over the years.
And it is challenging because like we had now that we're changing for Michelle's schedule, but found a policy committee on February 22nd, which I found out when I was doing planning is Ash Wednesday, and that's kind of like my job. So I have a worship service that night, and I was like, whoops. So I have a worship service that starts at 7 and a policy committee meeting that ends at 6. So that's not going to work for me. But it can be challenging when we're looking at calendars, not necessarily to think about those holidays, whether they're our own or others,
Absolutely.
right?
So since you brought up Ash Wednesday, how do we select the holidays in terms of what gets like major? And I know how we, what the process was for which religions using a constitutional standard, but I'm wondering about the holidays. So I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but I would say that people say, hey, if you're a Christian, you've got the whole it's called winter break, but it's really like Christmas break. You get a whole bunch of days off around it.
Or Hanukkah break this year because it coincides this year.
And then also that you're getting Ash Wednesday and Passover and Good Friday. And I'm just curious, is there a constitutional test for that?
Or I think the constitutional standard would be to have a religious neutral way of selecting those dates.
And what was the religious neutral way of deciding?
I don't know.
Well, what I see on here are the High Holy Jewish days, the Hanukkah, which is not necessarily High Holy, and then Ramadan, and then Ash Wednesday. And then like Good Friday is also during Ramadan this year, so there's overlap.
just to play devil's advocate, if it's an appropriate term.
Yeah.
Just to, like we have December 25th marked off as Christmas. If you're a non-Christian, it feels like that whole lead up and the break, a lot of it, is about Christmas. And so it just says 25th, and then like we've also got, there's also these other ones. So I don't have a point. I don't have a point of view, but I'm just raising an issue that could be the perception of the community that it's very Christian oriented. It says just the 25th, but there's no school.
I don't
forms.
think we've dug into the history of how those 2 weeks were identified and why that holiday has two. I mean, I think that goes way back into some areas that I wouldn't feel.
Okay, I'm just
Well, I do want to
flagging
find out.
that we should
Yeah.
ask the question.
No, and I think that's a fair question. I think, and I would say one of the things that, and I think part of why I'm advising or recommending that we seek out guidance from the Interfaith Council is what was instrumental for me in meeting with the Jewish Federation was that they articulated that although the Jewish faith has endless holidays, if you will, their primary focus, and they were very explicit, was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Passover.
Those are the three.
Right, those are if the district is going to communicate clearly. And so knowing that they are a strong suit in the Jewish community, I have a tendency to believe what they're saying to me. So if I reach out to the Muslim Education Trust, for example, what would they argue, or what would they share with us, right? I guess it's tricky because,
Yeah, no, so I guess my bigger issue is I'm saying that it seems to me that there's like an over-index on Christian holidays. Because I know nobody would schedule something on December 24th because it's Christmas Eve. So I'm just raising an issue that I think we should have a big, longer conversation about because.
I think the conceptual question you raise is why is the 2-week winter break then? Right. I don't think I'm with you so far that every one of those days is tied to Christian practices or religion. But why, back in the day, because it's been around longer than I have, are those the days that are recognized? And it does not surprise me.
I think
There's
that was
some.
back when Christmas trees were in schools.
Yes, absolutely, probably some roots in that, but I don't know that, so you have to do that historical look back to understand the origin, and then probably understand the practice today and why, and so.
Has it become secular?
Has it become secularized? That's a very good way to put it, Marion. Are all of those 10 days created equal on the weekdays?
Right,
Maybe
and
not
then-
rains.
Yeah, and I think, if we want to have a bigger conversation about moving when our winter break is, right? Like that is a conversation we could have of saying, why is this when it is in our school calendar? And is that really the time that makes the most sense for our students' academic achievement to have a break of that length? I mean, I think that's the ultimate conversation. Right now, it's out of tradition, and I think we can say that the tradition, it was founded from maybe a Christian worldview, but that's not the world we live in anymore, and maybe never should have been. So how do we think about this? Both that's a big change for people because I think that cultural thing of a winter break is huge. But I think, to really think like you're bringing forward for us, Julia, thoughtfully about what does our calendar look like and why? Like, why do we have a winter break here? Why do we have a spring break here? What is best for our student outcomes? And that's a bigger conversation, but I think it's important to have before us while we're thinking about these things.
Yeah, and I'm mainly more asking it because I think many secular Christians don't celebrate Ash Wednesday or Good Friday. And so I would just throwing it out there just for a longer discussion. I'm also curious, on November 25th, is that also Thanksgiving? It's labeled as Native American Heritage Day.
Yes,
November 25th.
I think November 25th is Thanksgiving as well.
November 24th is Thanksgiving.
So November 25th was the day after Thanksgiving.
So we don't have,
Thanksgiving listed.
oh, because it's not a cultural,
I mean,
though this is a cultural day, Thanksgiving is a holiday.
National.
It's a national holiday. So the national holiday, but Christmas is a national holiday, but it's also a religious holiday. Or some. So,
The day to sleep in for others.
yeah.
So next slide, to just highlight the point, and I'm done here, is, as you can see, like Rosh Hashanah here, making sure that 26 and 27 are on there, and still acknowledging that it starts at sundown on the first day on this calendar. So again, more work to do on clarifying communications. I would welcome feedback to the proposed calendar amendment, if you will, that's in front of you. Not amendment, but a different way of looking at the calendar. So feel free to provide edits and comments to me, and we'll get it out next week to our administrators and community.
So I have a question. I really like this. I just have to,
Please.
because I just saw it, so
Yeah,
I'm
please.
just giving real-time feedback. It's not intuitive necessarily to turn it over. So, on the asterisk, because you're like, wow, what are all those things? To make sure that people know where they can find where those things are.
Yeah.
When it's on electronically, you just
It's
scroll
one,
down, right?
one thing.
Yeah, but I think
Okay.
but I think what we should do is probably 11 by 17 and
Right.
allow it. Just put anyways.
Yes.
I'm thinking a design way. Yes.
Yeah, so then the other question I have is, so like right now, like if I'm trying to see whether something's happening at PPS, I go to the website. I don't go to look at this.
Yeah.
I look at this all the time because I'm a parent.
Well, I look at this at the beginning of the year and I put everything on it that I need to have on it on my calendar. But then there's some things that aren't on this, like committee meetings and everything. So I look at that website calendar.
Yeah.
And it seems like it should be there too, because like
Yeah.
I think BAC had I don't know how like meetings like that get scheduled. BAC, the climate committee, are people looking at the website calendar? If they are, those things should be on there because we had a BAC on Rosh Hashanah or.
Yeah, that's great.
That
Now,
should be on all like staff.
yeah, we'll
calendars,
make
too,
sure
like
that it's on the
central office.
universal PPS website calendar as well.
I think the board office has also started a new practice of looking at those dates before those public notices go out. Right?
We look at the dates and then we ask the CUB office to also, on their end, to check when CUB requests are coming in.
I can't hear you, Roseanne.
So we check, and then for the CUB office, we've asked if they could check as well when the requests come in from the school site, so it doesn't get that far.
So that's great. But is there a reason why we can't put it on the other calendar?
No, we
Because-
can't. We will.
Yeah,
that
as
would-
well.
I mean,
So I didn't hear that part of the question, sorry.
because I'm like, oh, there's a totally free day, nothing's scheduled.
There's another calendar, but the question was, where do people look? And like, we don't know. So we have the screening function when those
The
public
main
notices go
PPS
out.
calendar.
It's
Yeah.
they should look, and then we have this hopefully stopgap.
But like, Kara sent me a list of all the potential policy committee meeting dates, and I said, yeah, that works. So like, I think we're still gonna have things, slip through, but hopefully if we have multiple pathways, Julia, like you're saying, it'll be less likely.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Anything else on this subject? Gary, do you have anything to add?
Oh, gosh.
You don't have to have anything to add. I just like to make space for everybody's voice.
No, I appreciate that. It's like this. The Sun Peter said religious cultural observance school in session do not schedule district-wide events. Is that like sports events as well?
Correct. So that is sort of the next frontier. When the policy committee started this work last spring, the 22-23 athletic schedule had already been set. So there have been preliminary conversations with Marshall about the scheduling that'll take place in February of 23 for the 23-24 season. To the extent it's all intra-PIL, Marshall's, initial reaction is that most of it works. Football is the one he had to pause and think about, but that's just a conceptual level.
So
Yeah,
I
if
thi-
OSA, we don't control OSAA, so if OSAA goes, we can control only the intra-district activities, but
And so I think that makes, to your point though, I want to make sure that in this document that you're seeing, it is clear. And so I want to lift up some of the nuances of what this means now.
Right, and
Yeah.
it's, the work is
And
progressing,
then
and I don't know if there's legislation that may have more influence over OSAA than we do, right? I don't know.
So Juneteenth It's a federal and state holiday, so why is it on here?
Because I don't think,
Because we don't have other federals. I thought that's why we didn't
we
have.
don't have other federal holidays listed.
I mean, I think we were framing it as a cultural holiday, cultural observation. But to your point,
I'm
it's
just saying
moved,
if-
yeah, it's moved to federal.
I'm just trying to
federal
make sense
designation.
of like what the
Right,
list
and like
is.
Indigenous Peoples' Day is has federal designation, but we don't take it off as a school day, right?
Well,
So that's complicated.
so
Yeah,
it's on, the other ones are on here coded differently. This one just has the religious cultural
School's supposed to
symbol.
do the
But the
holiday
other
or
federal
break.
holidays are noted here differently.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's probably in that.
I think we should shift it over to the other because it's.
It's a federal, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't, it,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, anything else on this matter? Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, we're like 8 minutes ahead of schedule, so you can hang on to that. Field trips.
so this is picking up where we left off many months ago and checking in about the direction from the committee. Again, I didn't go back to look at it says 3/4/22. So in March, we brought, staff brought a proposal to the committee. My recall is that the committee voted it out, it went to the board, and then it was paused. The change is to alter the governance on individual field trip approvals. That sparked a discussion about equity in field trips and led ultimately to the budgeting of an equitable field trip fund. There has been some conversation, not at the committee level, but in other contexts about whether approving individual field trips, and it's a pretty narrow category, is necessary to give visibility to the implementation of the equitable field trip funds. I think that is, the board can decide what it wants to approve and what it wants to look at. I would just observe that that gives you a very narrow look at the scope of field trips that are actually happening, that there's a much broader population of field trips that doesn't come to you for approval. So if you're weighing those policy decisions, I'm not sure one fixes the other. It's not, there's overlap, but it's not a complete match. So we just want to know if you want us to progress with the proposed amendments that were paused for that very important equitable field trip reason, or if you want us to proceed further or do something else.
So my personal opinion, the conversation we'll have as a committee, is that I think that the board shouldn't approve field trips, and I think the board should get a quarterly report of all the field trips, so we can be looking through that equity lens. And that's because I think that equity piece is really important to see where the funds we've allocated are going, and who's getting to go on field trips and who's not, and how we might think about, again, the impact of that on our students. What do you all think?
So I guess for me, when I look at this piece, when you say quarterly, that's after things have already happened, right? So if something is not going right, then we're being reactive again. And two, because we don't know how the budget's going to be with the equity fund we did for field trips. I know it's fine right now, but in the new budget process, if those numbers gets reduced or what have you, then what other observation would we have to make sure that we're still equitable opportunities for our students? And those are some of the biggest things that I have when it comes to this piece.
So you'd rather have us see field trips before they happen rather than after, so we're not
Well, that's what it's
reacting.
supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be supposed to approve them before they happen.
Right,
Now, the fact that they don't do it that way sometimes, I think that's just staff had to figure out how to do it before.
So the
Okay.
field trip, like if kids are going to the pumpkin patch here in Portland, I don't know if kids still do that, but when I was in elementary school, we went to pumpkin patch. If that's during the school day, then the board never approves that
And within a certain.
with
Yeah,
distance.
It's 150
Right, over
miles.
150 miles.
Right, but if we're taking kids but if we're taking the entire second grade at Dunaway to Ashland for the Shakespeare plays, then the board would approve that. So we don't see the like in-town
Right.
field trips. So that's the question is, I think we should see, if we're concerned about equity and field trips, I think we should see all of the field trips. Because I think that would be interesting to know. And right now, we're only seeing the field trips that are overnight and 150 miles, right?
It's interesting because we did get all the field trips at one point in time, and it was some exercise. We got all the field trips, and it does seem like every school goes to the Bonneville like salmon hatchery. I mean,
Yeah,
so I would say like actually it looks like because those are cheaper,
right.
and there seems to be. Like I say, you'd see like 50 trips, and it's like, oh, every elementary school, third grade went to do X, or the Franz Bread Factory. I know you did that, Gary.
On there.
I still have my ruler for my second grade field trip. Literally.
I love that. I love it.
So it seems like that, and so the differentiator, it seems like, is the over 150 is when you really get the inequities of, I mean, here's what I've heard and observed is like things that cost money, or, for middle schools, like getting chaperones for some schools, it is a challenge for more than 150 miles for a variety of things, people's parents' work schedules, everything else, cost. So when I think it's like, do I need to see that everybody's going to the Bonneville fish hatcheries? Like it seems to be happening, but where we really get the bigger, I think the biggest equity differences is, a several-week trip to Japan, or the trip to Europe that was, $400,000 for one school with several hundred kids. So I think that's, to me, that's where you start getting these big differences. And like then at middle schools, like some middle schools didn't appear to have any field trips, and others like a way more robust.
So then those middle schools may be having field trips. They're just not the 150-mile field trips.
Well, talking to students, like they weren't having any field trips.
Right.
And-
So, and then we have issues like, so at Llewellyn, we would have field trips all the time to Oaks Bottom. Like every class did a couple trips a year because they could walk down and like learn about tadpoles, right?
Mhm.
So they're super close. They just walk down the hill.
Yeah.
So we do have some of those kinds of things where Llewellyn is uniquely located, and I'm sure we have other schools that are like right across the street from Friends Bread or
Like,
whatever.
liquor ponds and
Yeah.
stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I'm looking at too is the exposure piece, right? When you talk about trips that's like out-of-state trips, foreign travel, that's when I look at the equity piece, that's the exposure that a lot of kids are not afforded, right? And so as a board member, when you're looking at equity and exposure, that's something that I would have an interest in seeing or looking at to have some kind of accountability that we are allowing all schools to get that exposure, right? If it's something in Oregon, I get it, and maybe we can, add, instead of 150 miles, maybe 200 miles or whatever that is. But when I think about, like for instance, the girls basketball team going to Phoenix, right? Well, when I talked with Coach Knox, he was like, well, this is the first time that we actually got some money for doing stuff, right? And now this
Yeah.
allows us to do more stuff. Those are kind of things that I think, one, I would definitely want to know about. Two, I think that's something we can celebrate when we talk about our equity pieces. And when we talk about access and exposure, last year he took a group of girls to the African American Museum in DC, right?
Cool.
Those are stuff that we want to know. I want to make sure that that's happening as a board member.
Okay.
And so maybe it could be amended some, or something like that. But that's, as a board member, I would really want to see that, because those are those exposure pieces that growing up, a lot of kids don't have, especially kids of color don't get to. And if we can figure out a way to do that even more, you know, so that's why the only reason why I would really want to keep looking at the,
Again,
Yeah, that's
we just
fine.
are looking for direction, so we
Yeah.
are moving when we need to move and standing down when we should do that.
I'm okay for us to keep approving these field trips and keeping them before our eyes. I mean, I think it's, if reacting is what you're concerned about.
Yes, the
Yeah.
approval is a proxy for visibility.
Right.
And as long as that's a conscious choice. Again,
Yeah.
we don't, I'm not gonna, it's not.
Hey, Gary, I'm curious, how did you know that that was paid for by the fund? Did it say that in the
Max.
form? Or you called?
Hey, this is pretty cool. Like, are you getting help? And I know we passed the such. He's like, yes, and it was awesome. You know, even the excitement in his voice about it was like cool. And then I talked to some girls because they're all seniors, so a lot of them play with my daughter and stuff. And it was like, oh yeah, it's gonna be great, and we get to go here, and they're looking at taking a trip to like the DR and this, you know, which is all this other stuff that they could do now because they're not spending all their money on this one
Trip.
right? And so I think for me, like I said, that's what I would love to see. And I think by doing that, we could keep an eye on the equity piece. And also when we're looking at budget pieces, make sure we're prioritizing the budget stuff. If we're seeing stuff every 3 months or 4 months and it's, you know, kind of just glossed over, I don't want us to lose that focus to be able to fight that exposure for kids.
And it would be nice if on the field trip thing, it could say, you know, sponsored in part by the Field Trip Equity Fund.
Yeah, that would be
Somewhere on
great.
there,
Yeah.
so that
I
we
mean,
know.
that would be helpful, because I
That would be
think
great.
like this
We can
muscle,
celebrate.
Yeah.
once we exercise this muscle for a period of time and like it becomes like institutionalized in the budget and the practice gets institutionalized that we're doing it, it seems like then I think there's less need for visibility, but you know, it's like comes and goes, board members change, staff changes. And I think if what you don't see, you also don't necessarily value things just disappear sometimes in large institutions when people don't have visibility to it.
I have it, so it sounds like we want to reinstate line 4 there that was crossed off. All out-of-state and foreign travel shall require prior board approval with the exception of travel up to 150 miles from the PPS headquarters. So my understanding of that is Ashland actually is 150 miles away, but it's in state. So you wouldn't have to get approval to go to Ashland, but and you don't have to get approval to go to Vancouver because it's within 150 miles.
Right.
So as long as you're in the state of Oregon, you can go.
It's this is the Vancouver.
Right. But is it, and we don't see overnight, it's like if they were taking an overnight trip to Ashland, we wouldn't see that because it's in state. Okay.
Ashland's not more than 150 miles? I know we did this whole calculation at one.
I don't.
But it's in state because it says out of state and foreign travel.
Okay. We did have that. There was a
Instead of trying to
whole,
figure that out, that's like it's not as much of a parents that are
Yeah.
trying to solve the things.
Right. So I think, no, I'm just trying to say, are we approving field trips to Ashland if it's more than
No.
150 miles away? I think it's fine to have.
because if it says if it's out of state,
And foreign
It's
travel.
out of state and foreign travel unless you're only going 150 miles.
we spent so much time on those words.
Yes.
Yes, you
And
did.
I'm just making sure I understand what they mean.
Yeah.
So I can't go to Idaho, but I could go into Washington.
Well, you can go to Idaho, you just have to fill
Get
the-
approval.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine with reinstating 4 and I'm fine with the going ahead with the other changes.
In 3A. These are
Yeah, adding
more-
students at the beginning. That's underlined in red. And then the changes in 3 and then reinstating 4.
3A. 3A, B.
So what do you all think on those changes?
I just have some clarification on B. It says overnight wilderness and international trips will be approved by the principal and then sent to risk management and the principal supervisor for final approval. So is the risk management approving it or they're informing?
Risk management has.
They have review and approval, but they would not have the only approval, right? Instead, the prior language was review, but actually risk has to sign off.
And it's not final approval for some of those because it
Some of
will
those,
still come to the
yeah,
board.
it's really the compliance. Do you have the safety pieces? Do you have the housing pieces? Are you in approved housing? As you have looked at all those, I'm sure, meeting after meeting, there's a lot of detail.
So it has to be approved by the principal and risk management.
Yes.
It has to be approved by the principal, risk management, and the principal supervisor. Right.
So if
Can we
you,
just say that?
That's what it says.
This says, well, maybe I'm reading this different.
Overnight wilderness and international trips will be approved by the principal and then sent to risk management and the principal supervisor for approval.
If
for
we
final
need to make sure the
approval.
principal does it, his or her job first, and then the others follow. I think that's what it's trying, it doesn't mean that it couldn't be tightened, but it's not all at once. There's a sequence to
if
it.
we're leaving 4 in though, I don't think we need the word international because that's gonna go through all those things anyway.
Yes.
But overnight in wilderness could be within 10 miles.
I can see why you're confused there, Gary, about that.
Yeah,
I'm
maybe
wondering if
can
there's a
we
way
take-
to clean that
Yeah,
language
can we
up.
take and out and say maybe approved by the principal being sent to risk management?
Well, and so risk management approves it and the principal supervisor.
We could put a period after principal, the first approval, and we could say, once approved by the principal, it must then be approved by risk management
By
and the
both risk
principals.
management. I think. by
We should
both
just
risk
do
management.
comma subsequently to risk management and the principal supervisor for approval.
I don't want to do subsequently in
Yeah.
there, but, I mean, I'm
Versus
happy with whatever you
versus
want.
sequentially.
How about-
That's the only thing for me, it's not really, don't say.
What if it says approved by the principal, comma, and then sent to both risk management and the principal's supervisor for their approvals? So we are clear it's plural. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, so I'll say that again. Approved by the principal, comma, and then sent to both risk management and the principal supervisors, the principal supervisor for their approvals. So again, 3 times we say plural, that's the word plural. Okay, anything
Thank you.
else?
So can we put this on the next?
Yes, I think that can move to the board. Are we okay?
Just a quick question. So can we put in here, anything to saying like the district will help pay for stuff?
We can talk about that, yeah.
The distribution of the equitable funds isn't covered in this policy. It doesn't mean that the district isn't already doing that. So it depends what the policy objective is.
I mean, I think this is,
I'm sorry, Gary, what did you ask?
I was asking if anywhere in here can we put where the district will help financially for trips?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question because you could memorialize if we wanted to make it more permanent versus like last year it was a budget note or a budget addition by the board. You could, in the policy, have something high level, which is the district will establish and fund, at the board's discretion or whatever, or and I forget what we called it. And you could just name the fund.
that could go in the first sentence, the district believes in the value of experiences outside the classroom and endeavors to make these opportunities available to students. The board has established.
Yeah, I mean, so this is nothing about the purpose of that, because I think that's fantastic. I think for the board that approves the budget, to put in policy requirements on itself for a budget over time is awkward governance sometimes, right? I mean, you already control the budget and what goes in there. And budgeting through policy, that's not a budgeting policy, but a field trip. I don't know how many other times, like all the places we try to find information to make sure we're compliant is where do you look? And so there are value statements and there are instructions to, staff to execute on the policy and value statements, and then and thou shalt budget. And I
don't look at it so much as an appropriation versus like, we have in our policy, like there shall be a foundation for the district. And so to me, it's ironic that these words make it sound like we had equity before the fund when we really didn't. So to me, there's like, I'm just thinking like legislating, you have the authorization and then like the appropriation. And I don't think you want to appropriate in policy, but I think you can, describe a mechanism that would create equity, and then it's up to like an annual appropriation about, how much or whether there's an appropriation.
I mean, you could say the superintendent shall build into the budget this, right? But you telling yourselves how much to budget seems.
No, that's the appropriation. But I'm saying you could say in this policy that we're going to have a fund like the thing, which is the mechanism. And then in the budget process, that's when it's decided, $0 to $1 million. But
Want to put in, so anyway,
Yeah, I'm not
There's a question.
opposed to this. I just think it's messy. And so I think the question is, does the value statement speak to the value? And then the way we're looking at the value is the fund. And do we need to, I could see a case for enshrining it in policy. I'm not but I just think it makes it more complicated because we're already doing it and we intend to keep doing it. And but I could see why we might want to put it in there.
Yeah, that's a thought.
and board members come and go.
Right, that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
After we're gone, after this administration is gone, to make sure that there's something in here for that
Yeah.
still. That's the kind of I was thinking.
And I'd be fine to add a sentence to that beginning. We
Yeah.
just need to decide what that is and write it if we want this to go forward to the board at the next board meeting. So is there a sentence, Gary, do you have a maybe draft sentence you'd like to put in there?
If you move on to the next item, I could come up with something to share.
Okay, let's do that. So we're gonna table that for right now. Julia's gonna take a crack at adding a sentence to that first paragraph.
non-Robert's Rules of Order table, just set aside.
Just set aside, non-Robert's rules of tables, informal. Well, Julia, I know you wanna pay attention to these rescissions, so.
I already looked at them and I'm.
Okay, you're on board. Okay, great. Then go for it, Liz. I just don't want you to not be fully.
I wouldn't have offered.
Perfect.
And again, it's governance versus substance, and they're very
Right.
different, and the
Yeah.
substance, not concerned at all. 2 nominations for rescissions. One is, as you can see, school demonstrations. It's not aligned with our values, our approach.
Nope.
And we provided the very thoughtful toolkit that actually does
Yes.
a much better job. So
Yes.
I can belabor the point that it sounds like it's obvious. And then the second is the community campaigns and solicitations, and we just don't do this anymore.
Right.
So there's no United Way or anything like that.
Not
And
that
as
we
we-
concerned.
That
We
we
have
do as a
asked-
district?
Yeah.
I noticed we used to tell schools they had to run for the arts.
So
Do
it's-
not.
It's again
That was
also,
fun.
this is
They
a very,
can.
this is an example of a very
Yeah.
detailed
Yeah.
policy that doesn't stand the test of time, right? And to
Yeah.
get some of this
Yeah.
details like this out of policy and into AD or something else, not for this topic, but so those are the 2 we would propose for rescission.
I'm fine with that.
Yep, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Julia, in your 2 minutes.
Quick.
Yeah, hold on. I was just trying to see what we called it and looking at the.
All right, can we take a 5-minute break while you work on that? Because I need to use the restroom
me
and then we'll
too.
come back and we'll,
Maybe-
Gary and I have been here all day.
Maybe somebody could find it.
What are you looking for?
The name of the fund, like when
What
I
about the
when I introduced it, it was in May of
Who was it?
like May 9th or
I'm guessing this doesn't get voted out today if we insert this language, so we probably have time to technically accurate when that happens.
Pardon?
Because I can't remember exactly, was that a document you shared?
It was like May 13th.
We probably should actually not take this to the board at the next meeting. We should probably let folks, like our finance people, have a glance to make sure the language we're adding works.
And
So-
our academic folks.
And our academic folks, and just make sure we're being consistent throughout our organization and how we're expressing this. So, Julia, what are you thinking on that?
I'm just gonna send this and you guys, you can do it later. You can finesse it, but it's just like 2 sentences, like, and I don't think using the name of the fund, I think it's better to not put a fund name in because it may change, but just more of a description of an equity fund in the to support field trips and travel for schools. And then you embed it in there, but it's not named, so you have to keep changing it, and it's not an appropriation, so it doesn't get into the messy issue of appropriating.
Can you read what you have?
I was just saying the district will establish, I'm gonna send this to you, establish and sustain an equity fund to support field trips and travels for schools. The fund will be subject to the annual appropriation process or the annual budget process.
Is it every field trip that is, or is it limited to certain kinds of field trips that will be funded?
Well, you can add the qualified, since we're not.
Well, I don't
since we're
know
not
the
gonna
answer
take
to
it
that
out.
though. That's,
Well, whatever the language that Cheryl had in her, sort of the criteria.
Whatever the
was just-
criteria that they have for the equity fund, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess they can still use that. I mean, we don't have to try to just figure out everything in here, but as long as they have, whatever we have already established, we can use that.
so maybe just say certain types of trips. I'm just,
You could put in the AD, the equity fund language that exists. I don't know, we'll have to play with it, because
I just, yeah, in reading,
Yeah, and I'm-
if there's an expectation that every trip
We'll get
will
funded.
get funded, or, and that pot will always be full, like.
Right.
So Cheryl has some criteria, and I think we can keep it at 2 sentences, because I don't think you want, I think just the policy just has it as this is like the value, and then you can have detail on ADs, and the appropriation happens through the annual budget process.
Okay, so Julia sent us some draft language. We'll have our folks look at that, and then we'll bring something back at the next meeting And we'll just look at that piece because we've already agreed on the rest of the policies. So that'll be at our December meeting. So we've got
Perfect.
some time.
Thank you. That was helpful discussion. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I believe that we have some public comment. Ms. Bradshaw.
We do. We have Corona Cruz virtually. We'll start there.
All right. Hello, board and chairs. How are you guys doing?
Good. I like the bow tie.
Back at it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I had a presentation today earlier, some very good news. But anyway, I wanted to propose something to you guys all, and it's something that you can reconsider. I noticed the complaint process, as I've been going through the complaint process. I feel like it's a barrier once I put the complaint process in, that now I cannot have a conversation with any board members. And I was wondering if you guys can maybe reconsider or maybe revise that policy so community members can actually have a conversation with our different concerns. What I found is that when we reach out to you guys individually before we put the complaint in, it's hard to get a hold of you guys. Sometimes you guys don't respond and things of that nature. So for the sense of urgency purposes, you have to put the complaint in so we can get things moving. But then that kind of puts the barrier where I cannot have a conversation with you guys all to kind of give you details about, what's going on. So you're only kind of getting a one-sided view from the district. So once I put the complaint in, so now I feel like I'm in jail. So now I can't present any information. I can't talk to you. So then the only way you will hear from me is at the hearing. And I just feel like that's kind of problematic for the community. So I was just wondering if you guys can maybe have a discussion about that, and maybe something you can reconsider in your next meeting.
All right, thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Cruz.
Is it true?
What?
It is true.
Oh.
There were, the history as I recall it was that there was concern that the board on the final complaint appeals is acting as more of a judicial body than a legislative elected governing board. And for that reason wanted not to have individual conversations that some board members might be having that other board members are not. And so the final vote on that appeal of a complaint decision, there might not be equal information across all 7 board members. That wasn't my recommendation, that's not
Right,
all the
right.
thinking of the committee.
And I think part of it was that, there were some moments where board members were trying to solve problems themselves without staff, and there were some conflicts happening and different people saying different things to different folks. So it was like, how do we make this as clean as
It's a
Well,
tough.
how it came up, Gary, is Ephraim sent a complaint in, and he referenced a video that he was disrespected in, and he said, just look at the video. And I didn't, there was no video attached, so I asked him for the video, and I looked at the video, and it was, he was getting called out in an assembly for Black History Month. And so in a board meeting, I said something like, yes, it happened. And then somebody said, no, it didn't. And I was like, yes, it did. And the fact that I had seen the videotape, because I read the complaint and he referenced it and I didn't see the video, but I'd asked for it, that the sense was that I had information that other board members didn't have, even though everybody got the complaint and could have asked for it. So that was.
I would have to say, I have a different perspective of that I don't want to get into at this meeting, but there were reasons that the board chose to do that. I think that Mr. Cruz has raised a really important consideration. I do want to be clear that the policy is that we can't talk to Mr. Cruz about the specific complaint, but we can talk about CBRC and teacher excellence and other things. So I do think it's a really important conversation to have as we continue to look at our complaint process and try to make it as equitable and transparent for our families as possible. And so that is something we will be bringing up and talking about this year. And so I think this piece that Mr. Cruz has raised is something for us to keep on the forefront of our thoughts and as we continue to try to make things better.
The last piece I would add is some of the discussion on the other side of the decision was it's an awkward shift that you all have being elected by the community and being contacted by community members all the time, and we can come up with examples of how it works and doesn't work well. So it's not a perfect.
Does that mean for staff can talk to board members as well about
Staff can talk to board members.
So one side can talk to.
That's the one-sidedness, like, so.
That's
it kind of
true.
Staff versus complainant.
But yeah,
So I
so
mean, that's
that's,
odd.
but I
wouldn't
do
frame
think
it
it's
that
an
way either.
important thing.
One side, I'm not sure that's sides, but.
So two things, Gary. One thing,
So I think
we get
we're
the, can I just finish my sentence?
I'm gonna say, I said, we're gonna consider this as we look
I'll
at,
talk to you afterwards, Gary.
this is a conversation we're gonna continue to have, and I thank Mr. Cruz for his time. We do have other public testimony here, and we only have 4 minutes left of our meeting, so I'm gonna go ahead, Ms. Bradshaw.
All right, thank you. Pastor
you.
Larry, I would love to have a conversation with you as well, individually, if I
All right,
can.
moving on to another speaker, thank you, Mr. Cruz.
Sarah Messier.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good to see you again. I was at one of the regular board meetings recently. My name is Sarah Messier, and I'm a parent of a second grader at Rose Parks. So I'm here today to ask you to reform and modernize policy 3.40.010, emergency plans and procedures. After the security event at Rosa Parks this fall, I was extremely disappointed with the district's lack of response and support for my school. When I looked into the policies related to emergency planning, I found 2 relevant policies, one about emergency plans and one about drilling. The drilling policy is detailed, 3 pages long, and outlines the types of drills, the months they should happen, and was last amended last June. This type of policy is great, and when actually helped my second grader during his actual lockdown event, he thought it was just a drill. Perfect. However, contrast this to the emergency planning policy. It's a half-page long, was last updated in 2002, and directs schools to come up with their own individual emergency plans. I know we can all agree that school safety environment has drastically changed since then, and I have grave concerns that this policy will not keep our students and teachers safe. Leaving emergency planning, drilling, and response solely on the shoulders of schools and school administrators is no longer acceptable. It is not safe. It is beyond what school administrators alone can manage and results in inequitable outcomes. I expect the district's role and responsibilities around emergency planning and response to be codified in policy. I looked around at policies in other districts and really like the policy in Newtown, Connecticut, where Sandy Hook happened. The district's director of security leads the planning and response work in partnership with schools and other emergency response professionals. I hope this body can align our policy more closely with this one. We've seen violence happen at PPS schools already this year. I'm here to ask you these questions. Does a half-page policy keep our students safe and support school administrators? Does a half-page policy ensure that every school be provided timely and necessary resources to achieve equitable outcomes? Does a half-page policy from the Columbine era set us up for success in the post-Sandy Hook era, or in Portland, where drive-by shootings happen just over the week? Thank you.
Really appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
Julia, I realized that I thought the meeting ended at 5:30, it ends at 6, so go ahead and come back to that comment you were gonna make a few minutes ago, but we'll let Ms. Colby do her public testimony.
Either way it works.
No, we're good. I'm gonna ask Ms. Bradshaw Ms. Bradshaw, who's our next public comment?
Jessica Colby.
I have this for my ADHD brain, but I probably will go off script because that's what it does. Okay, Jessica, do I need? See, already.
Just say your name.
Jessica Colby, Colby. I'm the chair of the Talented and Gifted Advisory Council. And I'm here to address the policy change proposal to early entry to kindergarten.
TAGAC has actually discussed the policy for early entry and how inequitable it is with at least 3 TAG directors, but they and we have always been under the impression that they can't change it, we can't change it, nothing can change, and it's not your purview. But we have never liked it. We do, however, disagree that early entry to kindergarten is not a TAG service. It is, and it's one of the few, very few, rate and level services available for students in PPS. These kids need more. They are accelerated learners, they're highly capable learners. This is one way to provide them the services they need going forward from kindergarten. We do have a vision for a change in this policy. And we agree, it really does need to change. It's just not good the way it is. And we want it to become inclusive and include social emotional assessment and support. So in order to do that, for the kids for whom pre-K is not enough, because there are kids out there who will lose their, pre-K will be frustrating and boring. My kid was one of them. She was done, absolutely done. Luckily, she was 3 days before the cutoff. So we propose the following. Add the application process, or the possibility of it, to the pre-K page so that every parent who goes to the pre-K page can see it. Start with a parent questionnaire and possibly add a pediatric questionnaire. In talking to my kid's pediatrician, he was adamant that they have identified accelerated learners, highly capable learners, neurodiverse learners, and nobody listens to them. They are good at seeing these kids. Institute culturally competent assessments with multiple metrics like we are doing now, identifying later. The way kids are identified now, I don't like it. It's ridiculous. There are ways to do it that are not giving them a test and that's it. Pay for free and reduced lunch students to get these things done. Make kids who don't have the money pay for it. And then at the school the kid will be going to, have admin or some other teacher, whomever, preferably from the kid's community, assess that child either in a classroom or one-on-one and see if they're socially and emotionally ready for that classroom. Because not every accelerated learner is, and we fully acknowledge this.
Thank you.
Sorry, Julie, what were you gonna say?
Just, actually, I'm gonna go back to our first agenda item. Did we consult TAGAC about that change?
No.
Or,
TAGAC is
I
not.
mean,
I think we need Emily and.
Yeah.
yeah.
We never heard about it, and Matt
I don't
seems-
know necessarily they would have because of
It's not under
perception that it's not
Yeah.
a tag service.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I think when these are the kind of questions, if we maybe can email Emily, and when they bring that back for us to vote out of committee next time to have that conversation. Are you gonna email her or should I?
Oh, you guys, those,
Oh, we can
Yeah.
do that.
Okay.
do you want me to?
Yeah, and then, yeah.
So the thing I was gonna say, Gary, is we get the weekly complaint summary or every other week so that we know people who have filed complaints that this would be subject to. So for example, if I see somebody's name on there that I have had conversations with, I look to see I actually click on the link to see what the complaint's about because to stay within the bounds of the policy. And it's like, oh, they're calling me about the school calendar and actually they filed a complaint about air quality. So I can call them back about the school calendar, but if they called about subject of the complaint, I have to say, we have this process, blah, blah, blah. So that's why we get that complaint summary. And then the second thing I was going to say is we had the colloquy last night about the complaint policy within Division 22, and that there could be this bifurcation of our complaint policy so that it's the ones that are under Division 22, which have a very strict set of rules, and the board comes to the board, and then a complaint process that follows the Division 22 guidelines but aren't about Division 22 issues. And those may not ever come to the board. And those ones that never come to the board, like, we wouldn't know if somebody filed a complaint, somebody could call us, but there is like the possibility you could say, hey, it's just the Division 22, because those are the ones that are kind of going to come to the board. Now you could say, you would also want to say the ones that don't go to the board, you can discuss, but you're not supposed to solve because that's not the board's job. But it's not like you couldn't answer a question like, hey, you should, you know, whatever, something that's helpful, or answer a question like, no, you're misinterpreting that. That's not what that means. But not solving the problem. So
Yeah.
I think there's,
And yeah, I guess the this is thought on the process, not you guys are the policymakers, but any bent we have towards resolution is a good bent, right? As we're trying to, as we think about other categories, I would want to have as few constraints towards resolution at any level as we can, because that's good for, mostly it's good for the families who are trying to get something solved. So we're not there yet on the policy.
yeah, I mean, for example, Mr. Cruz sent a email about a complaint that was rejected. So it's like, oh, we can have a conversation about it because it wasn't.
It was
accepted.
diverted to
It was
a different.
Sorry, not rejected.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
diverted.
Yeah.
And can be responded to, but sometimes it's just a conversation like, well, it's because like you actually asked for public records versus something else. And so, I mean, I think it's open, that would be open to the conversation if you're like really trying to get people out of this very time intensive process. It's like not good, time intensive for staff, for the individual and for the board. Like, it's all the better to have it.
Yeah. So we are, at the December meeting, we'll bring a draft policy revision for y'all to look at and talk about all these issues, but I very much agree that anything we do to get resolution faster, better, is good for families.
Okay, anything else?
Does it?
All right, then we are adjourned early, which is great. I thought we were running late on time and we had like 22 extra minutes. So